puis nous commencerons. So welcome everyone, and thank you for attending the 2022 Canadian Web Archiving Symposium, hosted by the Canadian Web Archiving Coalition and sponsored by the Canadian Association of Research Libraries. I'm Julie Morin, Senior Program Officer at CARL, and I'll be providing a brief welcome and some introductory notes on behalf of Susan Haig, CARL's Executive Director, who unfortunately had to attend to a family matter today and couldn't be present. Before we begin, please note that simultaneous translation in both French and English is available for this session and can be accessed using the interpretation icon in the bottom right corner of your Zoom window. Une traduction simultanée en français et en anglais est
Simultaneous interpretation is available in English and French for this session. It's accessible by using the interpretation icon in the lower portion of your window.
These are joining us from the unceded territories of many Indigenous peoples who have lived and worked on this land for millennia and continue to do so today. My home and the CARL office, located here in Ottawa, are built on unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. I'd also like to take this opportunity to go over some logistics for the session. Participants have been muted upon entry. Our presenter will be taking questions at the end, so you are encouraged to type your questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. The organizers of this webinar are committed to providing a welcoming, professionally engaging, and safe experience, and links to the CARL Code of Conduct have been included at the beginning of the chat thread. Auto-generated captions have been enabled for this webinar, which is also being recorded. Finally, I'd like to thank Corey Davis, CARL VPO for Digital Preservation for organizing these two sessions, and Dana McFarland, Librarian and Coordinator for e-resources and scholarly communication at Vancouver Island University for moderating today's session. And so without further ado, I'll hand it over to Dana.
Hello, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Aitneta Mukwait. I'm pleased and privileged to join today from home in Staminas territory near Ladysmith on Vancouver Island. We're very excited to have with us today someone who needs very little introduction. Brewster Kahle is a digital librarian, computer engineer, internet entrepreneur, and advocate of universal access to all knowledge. He founded the Internet Archive in 1996, and under his leadership, it has grown to a comprehensive digital library that includes millions of books, movies, videos, TV shows, software programs, audio files, images, and of course, over 640 billion pages from the internet in the Wayback Machine. Mr. Kahle received an honorary doctorate from the University of Alberta in 2010 and was inducted into the Internet Hall of Fame 2 years later. Although based in the United States, he continues to play a prescient role in the Canadian Library and Archives community through the Internet Archive Canada. It's an honor to have you join us today, Brewster. I know that everyone here is really eager to hear your thoughts as we reflect on our community and look forward today. And in our meetings also tomorrow, we have a few questions that we've developed to guide us, to start us off today. And I know that from this community, we can expect some participation. I expect that other questions will come in as we go from attendees. So if you don't mind, I'll pose a question to get us going and we'll see how we go from there.
Yeah, and thank you very much for having me. This is really an honor, and I'd really like to understand also, you know, from all you guys, what do you need, right? Where is this going? What are the things? what can the Internet Archive Canada do, Internet Archive? You know, it's a good time to sort of think planning what should happen, and then how I'd like to try to figure out how I might be able to help. That is
great context. And folks, as you think about that and that invitation, I'll offer a question to Brewster, and we can use that as some framing. Maybe a big question, and just kind of backward looking as we look forward. The Internet Archive was founded in 1996. It's a long time ago now. When it comes to web archiving, I don't know how much you were looking forward to the present time at that time, but are we where you thought we'd be?
There's a bunch of interesting surprises. I think one of the big ones for me is that web archiving is not like a computer that just goes off and spiders the web. It's a community practice that there are now 900 organizations that are participating, saying what they think are the things that should be archived. Without those perspectives, I think that the collections would not be anywhere near as good as what they can and should be. For instance, there's the Community Webs program as part of the Internet Archive's web collecting, where there are, I think, 50 now organizations, but not just the big universities, but historical organizations, First Nations, that are going and saying, these are the important websites to make sure are in there. Now you say, well, shouldn't it all just be there because there's one big robot? And it's like, turns out, no. And also the wonderful thing is having these, well, picky librarians go and say, hey, you didn't do a good enough job of that video. And it allows us, demands from us to go and focus on this. So I'd say one of the biggies is the collecting aspect has become a community function. And now, for instance, there's different efforts to try to get all the Ukraine news sites because those could be undergoing a change. Also, another thing is the web is basically absorbed it all. So it's video, but it's also now ebooks, journals, and the like. And this is causing interesting clashes as we want to have the hypertext structure work. It's not working all that well with things like paywalls, or even there's some things that are coming up that are going into app world. So there are whole services that are starting to detach from the web. So this is a challenge that we're going to have to get to. The thing that I thought that would be happening more is more use of the collections. We haven't really succeeded at that. I mean, we have the Wayback Machine, which is great. We have Archive at Searchable Collections, cool. We're doing, I think, a pretty good job of collecting, but how about reusing? And how do we catalog these things, make these more available to our students, and how do we do data mining more effectively? I don't think we really know how to do that yet. So I'm looking forward to that. I thought we would be much further along than that 25 years ago. I thought we would be coming out with a Google a month based on having these common data sets available that we could build new vertical systems on top of. And for whatever reason, that hasn't been happening as much as it can, and I think should be. How do we inject these into economics debates, humanities more effectively? I think that these collections are hard to use. So let's try to solve that together if we possibly can.
And I am having a lot of thoughts just based on those those initial remarks. And there's a lot to go from in there. And I see that we have questions already coming in, but just as sort of an initial sort of unpacking, I'm curious about what you said right off the top there about how the value of community in the work and how important that has become. Was that a surprise? Like, could you foresee that community would become so important in doing the work, or did you see it more as a technical enterprise?
I thought of it as a technical enterprise back in the day. I thought it would be like how the search engines work. But it hasn't been that way. And the web has, by going and just crawling the web wasn't enough. We needed to go and add in other materials. So the uploads of books, music, video, because people had these things already and they wanted it injected in other ways. Television, for instance, was a really unmined and still is an unmined, very influential medium that's not collected very well and then woven back into our intellectual world. I don't know. To be able to think critically, as I was taught in high school, you need to be able to quote, compare, and contrast, right? Your classic essay. But if you can't quote what had happened, if it just flows over and you can't actually get a hold of it, then you can't grab hold of it and think about it in a different way than it was presented. And I think that things are just flowing over people as feeds. Wait, what happened when we went from pages to feeds? I mean, I think, pages are, Gutenberg. Feeds are kind of like, I don't know what horses do by putting their face in troughs. So this whole internet thing has shifted and changed. And we in the community have got to figure out how to make those things more useful to people. It's more like radio and television where it's flowing over. Even news feeds, where we need to be able to go and put things in new contrasts. And I'm worried about paywalls. We have to keep these publishers up and running, but they're not just coming with just pay it and you buy it like it used to be. They're coming with these terms of service that are really odd. So I think we've got some challenges in the library and archival community that are hitting us now and will hit us more.
I think there are probably about 100 people who are listening to you talk about these challenges with paywalls, with particular proprietary platforms, with apps, with walled gardens, trying to get the content crawled in these increasingly challenging circumstances. There's a lot of resonance among practitioners with what you're talking about here. So I guess and another question that we had some curiosity about is whether you could tell us something about what you're working on right now. And if I could put a particular spin on that, can you tell us about some things you might be working on at the Internet Archive, or that you might be working on that might try to leverage the capacity of community and the relationships to really get at some of these wicked problems that we are facing together?
Absolutely, love it. One of my favorites is a project called Turn All the References Blue. So if and we're just starting out with Wikipedia. So if you take Wikipedia is awesome. I think one of the great things of the internet, but you really want to be able to dive deeper, and you want to find out, are they referencing good materials? Are they referencing it correctly? Can we take the footnotes, the references, and make them clickable? Can we turn them blue? And we started doing a big project on this about 5 years ago, and working with the communities in Wikipedia to go and fix the broken links, because it turns out most of them were broken. And we had been archiving them preemptively, and waiting for the day that we could work with the community to go and fix them. And we've now fixed about 12 million broken links. Good, right? That's a good start. Let's go and do more of that. But then can all the book links can you make it so you could click on them and open to the right page right then? Could you go and make it so you could dive in deeper? Can you do that also with journal literature? Then flip it back around can you make the best materials available to Wikipedia contributors so that they can weave those into their future articles? Because I think what I found just in the Wikipedia case, but I think it's probably true of everybody, you learn from what you can get access to. And what you get access to is often, well, in Google. And so if it's not there, then it's not going to get used. And in Wikipedia, they bias towards saying that references that go to clickable things are more important. So sometimes the more clickable things are, well, things that come from paid sites, propaganda sites, and the like. And a lot of the things that are the best are behind paywalls. So how do we go and deal with that? Can we go and make it so if you're looking at a PDF, all of the footnotes turn blue? Can we make it so that all footnotes are clickable? I think we can, especially if we start leveraging interlibrary loan. The Internet Archive and Internet Archive Canada are doing a lot more towards interlibrary loan. And so can we make that really work well, not only for the Internet Archive lending based on the large scale digitization projects or collecting processes. There's scholar.archive.org now that has a lot of the long tail. We've weaved 20 million papers back into Google Scholar to try to improve that service. But can we go and make it so that the scholarly materials that are on the web are collected, preserved? Then can we go and make those available to people interlibrary via interlibrary loan? And then can we go and digitize all of the rest of the microfilm, microfiche, print materials and offer that through interlibrary loan and controlled digital lending. So this mass digitization of these different formats are going on great. University of Alberta donated a lot of microfilm and microfiche to us. So we're going to be starting to digitize that once we finish this large collection of serials that we got. And we're starting to try to figure out how to do more researcher services. So how can you go and make it so that people can data mine on top of this materials easily? Either based on our own computers or taking whole collections away, and you guys can go and use your own compute clusters to go and use these. How do we do that from a policy perspective without getting yelled at, and do that type of thing well? So that's kind of the things that we're working on most heartily in 2022.
Thank you for that. If I could pick up on that last bit, which you also alluded to earlier, around the frustration of getting what we've been working so hard to collect actually out there for use, building that awareness and building the use of among researchers. Can you talk a little bit further about perhaps what you've been tried, what you are trying? What particular frustrations you're encountering there? I think, again, there's going to be a lot of resonance.
I think that we've built APIs to be able to go and download things more effectively from the Internet Archive or upload things. So I think our APIs have gotten better, but it's still so much that the amount of material is daunting. So I think we need good middleware layers. One group called GDELT, run by a guy named Kahle, he's taken all the television transcripts and made a searchable interface so you can see and compare different channels of cable to go and say what's going, who's talking about what. It's been very useful to journalists, but without that middleware layer, a lot of the journalists didn't know what they could do with our collection. So I think one of the holdups we have is the collections are large, and we need these searchable interfaces to make them more useful to more people. But right now it's basically computer scientists that can basically deal with it, or digital humanities people. And we'd like to try to find, how do we go and work together? Like, do we work with University of Toronto has been interested in being kind of a text hub? Can we leverage that more effectively so that they could do some more of that? Also Waterloo, where can we go to try to make it so that these are massaged into place so that you don't have to start kind of from scratch with this huge pile of data. And what support structures are needed to do that. Really looking for answers there. So there's been some successes of people doing things, but I'm hoping that there's much more than just peeking and poking within the collections, but trying to get a bigger view. My friend Jesse Osabel, he said, humanity got a long way with the microscope towards understanding our world. What we need now is a macroscope, right? Can you take a step back and get a bigger idea of what's going on? And I think that we need this because people are getting confused by getting an onslaught of selective dissemination of information, whether it's in COVID or in the elections. That the internet has been, rife with misinformation, disinformation, but it doesn't look like disinformation because it's, it's a paper. But the scientists would have said, that's, it's an anomaly paper. But you can't tell that if it's just sent around on Facebook groups. Can we build more context around the information people are seeing? And that requires sort of serious work by librarians to bring context, a traditional role that we have played in terms of helping people understand what they're looking at. But right now, all of that's stripped bare on the internet as just, things that are just cycling around.
That's, yeah. I'm thinking too about the context in which these sorts of initiatives are happening. It strikes me that a number of the projects or initiatives that you're discussing seem to be happening in partnership with Canadian institutions. Is that a coincidence? And that, there is the engagement through Internet Archive Canada to take things maybe in a slightly different, maybe broader direction for a moment. I'm curious, I think probably others are curious as well. What opportunities, what draws you to Canada? What opportunities do you see that make this setting particularly interesting for you in the Internet Archive?
The Internet Archive and the Canadian institutions have been basically evolved together. And the Internet Archive Canada was started 15 years ago based on Carol Moore's leadership at the University of Toronto, when she said, before she retires, she wants to digitize all the public domain works at the University of Toronto. And by golly, she did. And it was, lots of twists and turns, but it takes that kind of determination. Also, there's, I think, a healthy distrust in Canada of some of the American institutions. So going and making sure that things are in Canada and by Canada and not as dependent on the institutions, as more and more of our academic institutions are all depending on databases coming from here and there. And those are being decided far away. So is there mechanisms of having things in Canada by Canada? Internet Archive Canada, again, 15 years old. Andrea Mills, who I think is on this call, is the exec director of that. And I was lucky enough to get into Canada a little over a year ago. It was really hard. Thank you to UBC for helping with and spent 6 months there. There's now a headquarters building of the Internet Archive Canada in Vancouver. I think the debutante ball will be at the ACA meeting, the archivist meeting in June there. Please come. There's also now just closed a month ago a data center in northern BC so that the materials, Canadian materials, can stay on Canadian soil, but also make copies of things that are from all the rest of the world and put them on Canadian soil, which is good. UVic is getting a rack that's stuffed to the gills with data of texts already. So hopefully that kind of engagement where it's more local, so the higher speed and that they can use these materials as well as this rack going and serving the rest of the world. Trying to think of an alternative to Amazon Web Services as a mechanism of going and taking advantage of some coordination and centralization, but not having it all owned by a corporation. So if we can have these Canadian data sets, the data servers be able to be used effectively, this is, I think, really important. I think the big opportunity that hopefully you guys would think through is digitize everything. Let's take advantage of this opportunity to digitize the whole darn thing. Can we go and make, instead of just thinking of our libraries as e-preferred, as e-only, but on our terms? So we're not just customer service departments for publishers' database products, that these collections are owned by the libraries in the same sense that the physical collections were, even if they're in digital form. Digital ownership, I think, is absolutely critical. And it's something you should think about and promote and defend in the policy discussions that are going to be going on in Ottawa. But let's go and just digitize the whole thing, add it into the web, do these, you know, I know this is a conference on web archiving, but the web has sort of become kind of everything. And we just need to go and make sure that the web's got the right things on it. So, and there's a organization called NextGenU, which is a free university that is operated by some folks at UBC and I think Simon Fraser. It's a free university with free courses. And we're thinking, can the Internet Archive Canada or the Internet Archive become the university library for a free university? Right? Can we, and what would it take to do the full set of things to be a university library that's digital? But with interlibrary loan, the Internet Archive Canada's collections doesn't have to have everything. It just has to be useful enough to all the other libraries, such that if somebody wants to borrow, a patron wants to borrow from the Internet Archive Canada, that they can use interlibrary loan to get it to serve back upstream. So basically becoming a university library. I know this is a long laundry list of things that's going on in Canada, but the idea is, if we're successful, Internet Archive Canada will be known and loved by your organizations and defended as time goes on and supported. So that's, please tell us how we can be useful to try to achieve those goals.
That's helpful. And I think it's, it sort of puts a different frame around another question that we had intended to ask you, and that has to do with our understanding in this group. As you mentioned, our concern really is around web archiving, and the intent was to ask you to reflect maybe on the relationship between archiving the web and the traditional work of collections. And, you know, in how far are those things the same or different, and what can we learn from one to apply to the other? But, and I think I'm still interested in understanding your reflections on that, but I'm also perceiving that you're seeing the activity of the Internet Archive really beyond the collections function. You're also looking at all of the other functions that have analogs elsewhere in the library around access that a library might.
It's all
provide.
Digital. I mean, it's all going digital. So yeah, we started with web archiving, but everything else is also completely critical towards making all of this work. It's a library. So let's go and build a library together. Let's do it on library terms. There was something that happened, and I don't know exactly when libraries started to outsource key critical archiving and access technologies to corporations or to nonprofits that act like corporations, and we lost control. And I realized that we don't want to replicate what everything else we're doing. We want to be more nimble, but I think we've lost something. And so I think we need to examine ourselves and our collections and our collection priorities and what our ownership duties are. But also then how do we go and produce really great services that are the ones that people are expecting? that can only be done by libraries, that corporations can't do it. I had an experience with this microfilm collection. There's the UMI's microfilm collection. So UMI, University Microfilms, they started collecting dissertations and periodicals, and they did these licensing deals with publishers to be the exclusive micro reproduction of these. And so they ended up with this unbelievable collection of microfilm, but microfilm doesn't last forever. They say it'll last for 500 years unless you throw it away. And so this University Microfilms, which is a corporation kind of doing a library's job of going and making an archival record, they went and they were sold to Xerox, then I think it was Pitney Bowes, then they kind of became ProQuest, but the microfilm business then got spun off as NA Publishing, which went bankrupt. And then this bank was trying to figure out, should they just throw all the microfilm away? And I asked if they had ProQuest gone and digitized all this microfilm, and the answer is no, they hadn't. And I was like, why not? And I think it was because they were a corporation. What libraries can do with materials, because they own them, is do things like interlibrary loan and the like. And they didn't, I guess, want to go back and try to renegotiate with these publishers. They're probably long since gone and didn't really matter to people anymore from a corporation perspective. But from a library perspective, it was absolutely critical that we hold on to it. So we ended up, a sister library bought the collection out of bankruptcy and is being digitized and is being made available through interlibrary loan and machine learning, and we'll go through other steps along the way. So why am I babbling on about this? Is the corporations have a very different perspective than we libraries. And I think we can't just outsource all of our activities to them. We also can't just trust one jurisdiction to be the best one, whether it's American law or whatever. So we have to go and work with our legislatures, and you guys have done really well with some recent guidance and copyright reform, which is tremendous in Canada. Let's do more of that. And let's go and build national jurisdictions and collections that don't depend on, well, things that we can't control.
Okay. Well, I feel like I have been monopolizing the conversation because I have been on behalf of everybody else, but I know that we have some questions here. So I'm gonna ask Corey at this point if he would like to bring forward perhaps a question or two out of what we've received.
Thanks, Dana. And yeah, so Brewster, I think there's a question here about copyright and its barrier to digitizing everything. Even though many libraries are e-preferred, there's all sorts of barriers around licensing and copyright. And how have you dealt with that issue at the Internet Archive?
On the Internet Archive, we're very careful about copyright and respectful, but there are certain things we're expected to do. We're expected to preserve materials. We're expected to acquire materials legally, and we're expected to go and make things as available as we're legally allowed. So the blind and dyslexic, which Pascal in the comments was asking about, is a clear-cut example, and why the Internet Archive started book digitization, why we've been digitizing these periodicals, is for the print disabled. And there was a Carol Moore again, she said, Brewster, 7% of all of the incoming freshmen at University of Toronto have trouble with print. That's a frighteningly large number to me. And I thought, this is the University of Toronto. Imagine if we had good services for students before they hit university age, how many more could have gone to University of Toronto? So if we can go and make our materials not available just to those that have high needs, but those with some, I don't think we have 7% of our students going to our disability offices. We would be overwhelmed. That's a high touch, low volume How can we go and do things? But anyway, we have the right to do it. We have the responsibility to do it. Let's go and digitize for this. Marrakesh means that we can move things across borders with much more clear-cut rules. I think it was okay before then, but anyway, Marrakesh makes things really clear cut. There's machine learning has been litigated and is positive. So there's reasons to go and make all of these things and put them in digital form and make them useful. The Internet Archive is being sued over controlled digital lending, which I think is a very conservative, respectful approach of one book, one reader at a time. But I think we have to do it. Web archiving was even controversial in a day. And then we have to try to figure out what do we do with paywall. So I think things are becoming more adjusted. I don't think people are worrying about web archiving of free websites at this point. And so how do we go and make fair balances work? But laws are not going to be changed prospectively. They're done in response to a problem. And so I think we have to go and remember what our libraries are for, what we should do, and move forward. And yes, it may be, not explicitly in the laws. And in fact, whenever the lawmakers try to make laws proactively, they usually get it wrong because they're getting influenced so heavily by, people with hypotheticals that don't turn out to actually reflect how people work. So long way of saying, yes, copyright is a major consideration in what it is that we do, what I think all of us do. We work within those laws, but we should make sure that we're being the best libraries we can be. And there's a lot that we can do and should do and are doing.
And I just kind of reflect on that a little bit. When you say that web archiving at one point was quite controversial in terms of copyright, how did that resolve itself? Did it just kind of go away, or did you have to prove it in court, or how did that end up?
I don't think court's the right way to answer almost any of these questions. I mean, it's such a blunt instrument, and it usually comes out with all sorts of wrong answers. So these billion-dollar corporation publishers, and there are now very few of them, decided to sue us, I think it's going to come up with much worse answers than what we were doing before with controlled digital lending, in which we've made sort of concessions and work back and forth about taking things out. But anyway, that was their choice, not ours. So yes, things just evolve along. So basically community practice.
Okay, thanks, Brewster. I have a question here from someone who I think is in Vancouver, and we're very interested about your facilities there. Now, I heard rumor there's even a pub. Now, I don't know, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what your Vancouver headquarters.
Oh, it's like. So great. It's so great. It's just outside of downtown. It's on West Pender. It's a beautiful small building that's been used as a venue. But it's got columns, and it was a former bank. But it's used as a venue. So it's used for weddings and movies and things like that. And the idea is to have it evolve into being a central location for the open world to gather. So yes, it has a bar, but the idea of having it so that it's not just offices and a scanning center. That's sort of not what you can really do these days financially in the middle of Vancouver. So it's mostly it's going to be a gathering place for the open world. So please come. It will be a fun event in June, and we'll see in other events. Please just schedule us into whatever meeting, or just drop in when you're there.
Very exciting. Okay, well, while we wait for some more questions to come through the chat or the Q&A, folks, please feel free to type in there. I do have a question about this transition from sort of a technical approach to a community-based approach. And how has the organization Internet Archive itself evolved over that time from, computer engineers centering it to something that cultivates those communities and the kind of investment that you need to make to do that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I think the sweeps of changes of the Internet Archive over these 25 years has been, starting as sort of a technical organization to go and work on these materials. But from the very first collection was done in conjunction with the Smithsonian Institution. It was the presidential election websites of 1996, the campaign websites. The Smithsonian thought that web might turn out to be something, and maybe these are going to be the first bumper stickers of the next generation. So they worked with us. They gave us a letter, which was actually very important to be able to go and say, look, the Smithsonian wants this to happen. They knew why we would want that kind of collaboration, and they were happy to provide that. The Library of Congress came along in the year 2000 to actually help sponsor the digitization and collection of the web archives around the elections in 2000. So it was always sort of starting out in these ways of working with others. But it really took a major turn about 5 or 6 years later than that, when we started to try to get large numbers of smaller organizations to participate, because each whether it's national libraries or university libraries, needed to go and do their own, but going in, we gave away the software, but it was too complicated to use. So people do take the software that we produce and do their own collections, which is great. But going and working together, not only do we, get the tools to be better and better, but also the collections can get integrated in an interesting way. Then about, I'd say 5, 6 years ago, we really started shifting over towards not just being a help for other libraries, but to actually build the library functions in the Internet Archive itself. And that was based on funding. And a lot more of the funding of the Internet Archive is now coming from donations and grants towards being a library on the internet, the internet's library. And can we do that? And can we do that in a respectful way, such that it's not trying to be the library that ends them all, right? We're not trying to be that thing. So how can we be a collaboration between lots of libraries? So now over 1,000 libraries have put forward books that are now been digitized and are part of that collection. 1,000, that's awesome. And 900 in the web collecting area. Can we now make a more decentralized library system based on some of these tools, techniques, collections in Canada, the United States, maybe in different universities with different collections? Can we get the best of both worlds of centralization and decentralization if we just sort of keep our eyes on the right North Star and don't sort of get greedy?
And Dan, I'm going to turn it back over to you in a moment here. But Brewster, I do have one question as well. I know that you have obviously tangled or had issues with publishers in terms of controlled digital lending, but I wonder what kind of pushback you get from the library community sometimes, and how and what that looks like.
Actually, we've done very well with publishers and websites and all those sorts of things. I mean, 25 years, and basically they picked to sue us during a pandemic. It's like, awesome, guys. So I don't know, maybe it's just the bad behavior that we saw a lot of in 2020. I'm hoping that's the anomaly. But it may be that they're just growing so strong, they feel like they can do kind of whatever they want. And there's so few of these publishers, whether they're academic publishers or these large, Murdoch controlled, things, these gigantic trade publishers. On the library system, actually, I've been a little surprised at, some have been really gung-ho to work together and some have not. I think there's, in general, when this whole digitization wave was coming along, they're trying to figure out, are they better off or worse off by working together or having their collections show up in other places. Oops. Oh, there's some noise in the background here. Just one moment. Sorry about that. It's the home office challenges. So how do we work together? How do we make something work? How do we go and make it so that we have the robustness of a distributed situation, so just this morning, somebody pointed out a major university in England was digitizing a newspaper collection, but not making it available, even though it's way out of copyright. Why? Why aren't we going and working together more? And I think some of it's because the abuses that have happened when we've gone and made things available. So I think we should try to figure out. And here's my offer and our opportunity for the Internet Archive Canada is to work with you guys much more closely in such a way that we can bring all the libraries digital. So we can wave a wand and you get your collections digitized, or your new collections helped out to be in that are from Born Digital materials, and then you get copies back if you want them. If you don't want them, that's okay. But how do you go and use that? I mean, it's starting to be that a petabyte is just not that hard a collection size to have, and a petabyte is a lot. So maybe we should not think about it from the old mainframe days, where we have to outsource computing type things. We can actually bring it back in, but in a different way than maybe the supercomputer centers, or maybe we try to reform those, so that's, I think, the conversation and the discussion. I think Canada is a good place to do it because you're less beholden to some of the large American interests that can make it so you can have some independence. And the Internet Archive Canada would like to help in those conversations. Let's digitize the whole thing. Let's make our digital collections great, not just through digitization, but through Born Digital. Let's figure out the paywall issues. Let's get digital ownership solidified in Canada, so you have collections at the end of the day. I mean, the idea of having these things owned and you're subscribing to these things and paying for them and building them for them because your fees, but you don't have the materials anymore. Okay, maybe they're in some portico thing, but is that really good enough? And I'd say no, it's not. So if there's things that we can do, let's dream a little bit. Let's come up with a Canadian library system that's got great interlibrary loan, put it on our own terms. I think the laws are there for this. It's how we used to work in the print era. Let's apply some of that thinking to our digital era.
Thanks, Brewster. It's good to hear the optimism. I think people need that these days. I think we've cleaned up fairly well in terms of the Q&A and the chat. Dana, I'm sure you have.
I must have been more controversial than that. Is there? Please, in the chat, go and just please ask some questions.
Yeah.
Well, I have one or two, in going in quite different directions. One of them is maybe a good wrap-up question, but before then, I've got one that maybe takes off from Susan's earlier question about copyrights, and it's information rights of a different kind. Really, I'm just thinking when you say let's digitize it all, Brewster, we have ongoing conversations in our professional community these days around Indigenous knowledges and the appropriate approaches and stewardship related to those for academic and other libraries. And I'm just wondering if you might be willing to reflect a bit on the Internet Archive's responses or approaches with respect to that kind of content.
I think it's an interaction. It's back and forth. It's people becoming comfortable with things and feeling like they're not going to get abused. And the answer is not always just complete openness, complete download it and go. There's rights issues. There's things that want to be only available to particular communities. There's personal archives that should be only available after a certain amount of time. There's the personal digital archives, I think, is a big and interesting area that we should do much more with, and that's got every rights issue you can imagine. Just putting up all of your journals or all of your email up. It's like, well, yeah, maybe. It's like, okay, but maybe after a particular period of time, or maybe for particular uses, or everything's getting to be, different kinds of access is okay, and have it evolve. So it's a conversation evolution as we're all adjusting. But I think that a lot of the younger folks are expecting a lot more access to their materials or to other materials to be able to do their work. And the computer data mining aspects may be allowed for things where going and republishing, it may not be, right? And I think we need to go and distinguish library access from publishing, that we don't need full publishing rights to put things on the internet in a library. If we have to go and just say we're only going to do things in the public domain, we're not going to end up with a very good library and not online. So how do we go and make that transition such that we have some level of access, but not as a publishing platform? We even get into this issues when people upload things that are kind of offensive, like clerics going and giving offensive speech. So you don't want that necessarily broadcast, but you don't necessarily want it completely gone. So how do we libraries play this kind of role? Like, who would get access? How do you do that? I mean, it used to be that it was just like, well, we guard that based on people being in our library, but how do we do that in the online world? A lot of these questions are still to come. I think we just have to be part of the conversation, not too strident, listen, try, take first steps, engage people. Let's build great collections of everything, even though not everything can be made available to everybody all the time in ways that they might want to immediately.
Thank you for that. And I see that we do have a question that's come in that I think perhaps follows it up. And it's in the Q&A. So someone is asking, when I work with my archivist colleagues, they stress the importance of archival context when creating access. And I think this is what you're distinguishing, right, is between the digitization process and the access that goes with it. When creating access to digital copies, for the digitization end of IA, how do you approach the need to provide this archival context around these types of records? So I don't know if there's more that you'd like to say about that.
Metadata is the sort of bane of our existence, right? It's also hard, but at least we can help people out so that they know what they're looking at. And we'd like to do these type of context, not just around the material, kind of, you think of like a YouTube, here's the video and here's the information around it, but can we actually build it into it? Can we put annotations going forward so that people sort of know that this thing is disputed? We're starting to put context even in the Wayback Machine. So if there are things that have been seen as debunked, basically, that we have a banner that comes up that goes and says, okay, here's something about what you're looking at that may make you think differently about it. Because we see some of these things just cycle around so fast around the internet and being passed off as true by particular groups. But we know more. And how do we inject that back in? I think we're still just learning to do that. But boy, do we have to keep the context with the materials. I think that the metadata and the data have got to stay together, because if we ever let them drift apart into a database over here, they may never come back together again. So for instance, in the copies of the materials that the Internet Archive is putting into, say, the university at UVic, it comes with all of the reviews and all of the different types of things. So let's keep the context together. I think that may be a good definition of our role going forward as libraries, is we're providing context for the flood of information that's coming from biased perspectives. They always come from biased perspectives. Can we go and help people understand what they're looking at?
Thank you. That's really helpful to me. I see we are getting sort of close here, so I'm going to try and get in one last question that I think really may help us as we position ourselves for our ongoing discussions tomorrow. And that is just to invite you as a partner to organizations such as ours, someone who has been in a position to, over the history of the Internet Archive, look at the development of communities of practice and work with them. What do you see as being some of the markers of successful communities of practice as you've seen them develop and work and thrive or not thrive?
What's the indications of communities? I read this book by Deanna Markham and Roger from Ithaca about the Google book settlement. And they were big pro people about the Google book settlement. I wasn't. But Deanna Markham, who worked at the Library of Congress and CLEAR, the first part of the book is all about how libraries have had a difficult time figuring out how to work together. And I think that's true. I mean, maybe it's based on our funding structure, how our structure of our field works. We're not that good at working together. Let's try something new here. Let's go and build collections together. Let's go and build some tools together. If the Internet Archive can help with this, Catherine Falls is the liaison on Community Web. She's available all the time. Just use her and just come up with requests. Come up with ideas that was like, I don't know, why don't we do this? And I'm going to just try very hard to just say yes. Let's just do all of the Canadian GovDocs. Why not? Let's go and make some data sets that can be used, say, the end of term crawls of Canadian elections, and just make some data sets that would be fun to play with. I don't know. Let's just go into 2022 with a yes attitude. Let's build a new structure for how we can work together in this digital era, where the communities of practice are, I think we're good at talking to each other. We like going to these conferences, we hear each other, but then do we end up changing what we do when we go back and build the right institutions with the right incentives to continuously share and evolve? And that's our challenge. And I'd like to engage you as much as the Internet Archive can, but probably more to the point Internet Archive Canada can, through the efforts in the next few years. I don't have all the answers, but you guys maybe have the right requests and the right components. Let's build something really meaningful and useful. It's certainly that the people are turning to these resources at a tremendous rate. The Internet Archive is about the 300th most popular website. It gets millions of users every day. So people want all of this old stuff that are not necessarily in your institutions. There are a lot of unaffiliated researchers, Wikipedia contributors and the like, but then there's also your students and professors. How do we go and provide for them? How do we go and take their data sets that are innately digital? How do you take the web sites from these past research projects and they want to move on? How do we archive that such as it's a running website, not just pictures of the web pages, but actually continue running? Can we go and take research practice and put it on our shelves and support it over time, or are we signing up for something that's way, way, way too hard? So, I would really tip my hat to Cornell that took on Archive with an X, but it's expensive to run. So can we make it easier so that the work product of researchers can be continued to be served by us in the same way we serve their papers going forward? Can we serve their websites going forward? Anyway, those are some of the challenges I would love to see us as the academic community. And as we open our doors to people that are further away, and maybe alumni or interested people that want to use our collections more effectively.
Well, thank you, Brewster. You have given us so much context for the work that we have all been doing in sort of an atomized way. and also in community of practice, but you've really set us up well, I think, for this time that we're creating in this couple of days to reflect together and look forward. So I really want to thank you on behalf of everyone.
And thank you, Dana. And thank you to Carl for going and pulling together some of these, the policy issues and these conversations. I was honored to get a Carl Award a decade or so ago. But now I think that the time is right. There's money available. There's technology that makes it easier. Let's do some things.
All right, so I will just adjourn us for today at this point and remind everybody that we get back together again at 10 a.m. Pacific. I'll exercise West Coast privilege and say the time in Pacific. And we are looking forward to talking then. And if everyone would like to just express with clapping or however you do that in this environment, your appreciation for Brewster's words today, please join me in doing that.
Yeah,
Thank you
so
all.
much. Bye, everybody. Thanks again, Brewster.
Thank you.
Much appreciated.